All right, well, my name is Glenn Blair, and 21 years ago, I accidentally started a project that led to my writing a thank you note a day for a whole year. $365 consecutive letters written to celebrities, friends, and total strangers. And that experience and the enormous rewards and remarkable events that grew out of that are the basis for a book that I had just written entitled 20 Years of Reward from 365 Days of Thanks. It just summarizes all the good things that happened to me because I happened to write a thank you note a day for a year, some years ago. June 24th, 2001, I wrote a thank you note to a colleague of mine at Wallace. A very routine, just standard thing. I typed it because I have lousy handwriting. Typed it up, sent it off, that was it, nothing special. The next day, I had a similar kind of something happen, and I needed another thank you note. So I just went to my computer, and it was all there, typed it up, bingo, it's out. On the third day, as I recall, and this is a long time ago, I was reading The Plain Dealer and came across a story about an 8th grade math teacher in an inner city school that had taught some of his 8th grade girls how to play chess so well that they were beating the teams in the cushy suburbs. And I thought, wow, that's a remarkable accomplishment. I think I'll write him a letter, and I did, and I used that same format. The fourth morning, I got up, and it occurred to me right away that maybe I should try to start every day with a thank you note. That would be a positive, uplifting way to get the day started, and I wondered if I could do that, and it turned out I could. 361 days later, I had written a full year of thank you notes. The responses to this thing were really quite extraordinary, and one sticks out in particular. We're in Medina. My wife the phone is rung. My wife picks it up, hands it to me, and says, I think it's a telemarketer. He kind of stumbled over your name. Now, in those days, we actually answered the phone, so this wouldn't happen today. And I'm thinking about what I might say to end this conversation quickly and gently when the voice came on the line and said, "This is Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes. Well, instantly, I changed my planned comment to, yeah, and this is Donald Duck from the Disney Channel. But before I got that out, thank goodness, I recognized that voice. And instead I said, golly, the real Mike Wallace? And this voice laughed and said, yes, the real Mike Wallace. Well, why is Mike Wallace calling me? Well, you, I'm sure, have guessed. He's calling me to thank me for a thank you note that I had written to him sometime before. The thank yous fell into 4 distinct categories, the ones I had to write, just the normal ones. Thank yous to celebrities like Mike Wallace, but not for their celebrity status. For example, Paul Newman, not because of his blue eyes and acting skills, but because of his hole-in-the-wall gang charity and some other very positive things about Paul Newman, I thought. I wrote letters to strangers, like the math teacher, the people I didn't know. But my favorite category was my friends. And that turned out to be the best reason for the project, and it was just very, very interesting. Well, first of all, celebrities. The main fun about the letters to celebrities was finding them and seeing whether or not they would respond. I thought that would be very interesting. But that didn't last too long, because letter number 83 was sent out on September 11th, 2001 to Drew Carey. And the terrorist attacks, and especially the anthrax scare after that, resulted in many celebrities not looking at their mail anymore. In fact, the Drew Carey thing came back with a stamp on the back of the envelope saying, Mr. Carey no longer accepts mail. But I did get some very interesting responses, and my favorite, I think, is the one I got from Joan Baez. I was always smitten with her. She's smart, beautiful voice, gorgeous, everything about her. And I came across her a couple of times. One was on a flight, and she'd stopped by. She was on that plane, down the aisle, and picked up an infant from a soldier and started goo-goo-gooing and all that stuff. And I thought, oh, spare me, another big hotshot trying to act like a decent person. But the joke on me was that she walked with that baby from Chicago to Seattle. And oh my gosh, I was so impressed. 20 years later, I saw her perform in the Lakewood Auditorium, and she was just sensational. So I wrote her a note citing those two examples and saying, and this is pretty, when I think about it, pretty brave thing to do, I guess. I said, I almost wanted to come up on the stage and give you a hug. And I sent it off. And I got a very personal response. It came back in an envelope with the home address on it, handwritten, but it wasn't from Joan. It was from her mother. Joan Baez's mother wrote me to say that she loved the letter, and she looked forward to the day, Joan said, that I would see her again and come forward and get my hug. And Joan's mother said she just thought that was wonderful. She hoped that she would be around to see that. Anyhow, that kind of response really kind of picks your spirits up, I must say. Strangers in the News, they were fun because you're always looking for something that's positive. And one that stuck out that I remember was a mariachi band in Roma, Texas. Roma, Texas is right on the border. It's an impoverished, kind of crime-ridden place, best I can tell. But this band director had taken these high school kids and turned them into something that was getting national prominence. And I just thought that was fantastic. So I wrote a letter. A couple of weeks later, I get a phone call. And there's this little high school girl voice on there saying, Mr. Blair, we got your letter. We were so happy. Our director read the letter to us. Then he got a map out and showed us where Medina, Ohio was. Oh, thank you so much. And then there's a little pause. Oh, by the way, we do have CDs if you're interested. You want to make a pitch for a CD. Friends, now this is the best category of all, but a very difficult one. Two types. One were letters to friends who had done something for me in the past, and I had just never thought to thank them for it. But it's kind of lingering there, something that I should have, but I didn't. And the other was to friends who have just been friends forever, and I've never had a reason, taken the time. There's no excuse for writing a thank you note just to some old pal saying what a great person you are. And this project, when I got rolling, made it very easy to do that because I had a format, I had an excuse, I could just easily write a letter to someone. Now, the difficult thing about friends, when they get a letter like that, they're thinking, oh, Blair's sick. He's on his deathbed trying to get right with the world. Or that guy living in a box under a bridge, oh my goodness, he's going to hit me up for a loan very, very soon. And so that was kind of in my mind when I wrote these. Well, here's an example, a good example of that. This is from written to a guy I was in the Army with, and we've been friends forever. But you know, you don't, to a male friend, write him a thank you note, and yet I'm writing thank you notes to total strangers. So anyhow, I have to shape it just right. And here's what I wrote, a little bit of it. How shall I say this? Previous comments have been tinged with smart aleck comments. So just this once, I'm going to flat out say thanks. No apology, no explanation, just thanks. Thanks for being a terrific friend, for being at my wedding, and all that. It gave me an excuse to write a letter. And by the way, this is the format. This is how the letters worked. They all had the top and the little note, and I just filled in the in-between sort of stuff. And my friend Bob got back with a letter that didn't surprise me at all. It said, thanks for your thoughtful and kind letter. At first, I thought you were terminal. And then he went on to kind of explain that. But it just worked beautifully. A chance to thank a good friend without being embarrassed or anything. Another one that really sticks in my mind is a guy I went to school with years ago. We were freshmen in the business department, and he came back after the first semester, and decided he's going to switch to pre-med. And of course, we all just scoffed. Pre-med is an impossible discipline. Nobody can get through that. And furthermore, he was extremely active on campus affairs and stuff like that. But he made up his mind, and he did it. And I have this memory of seeing him come back from an event in the evening, studying till 4 in the morning, studying all night maybe, and he achieved his goal. He became a very highly regarded orthopedic surgeon in Central Illinois. And the thing that made it interesting to me was I've been telling this story in my classes. I taught at BW for 23 years, and I had a management class, and I told this story as an example of finding your niche and persevering. And 1,000 students that heard it, the only person that would care about it that hadn't heard it was Dick. So I wrote him a letter, and I hadn't had any contact since we graduated. Got the letter, I felt good about it, I'm all excited about what his reaction was going to be. I walked down to the mailbox, I get down, put it in the mail, walk back up, get in the car, drive down, take it out of the mailbox, take it over to the post office. So I come back home, and my wife says, "What was that all about?" And I told her, and she said, "Well, you know, may I just comment on that? You haven't talked to him in any way for 45 years. Do you think 45 years and one more day would have really mattered?" I said, "Yeah, I think so. I wanted him to see it." Anyhow, he got back with a perfect letter. He just was so pleased to be remembered, and he was so grateful and invited us to spend the summer at his house. It was just a wonderful example. That's all I can say. It was just a great example of the letter writing. The final letter that I wrote was to Mrs. Alice Myers. She was a 6th grade teacher that did a number of things that changed my life in a significant way. I'm left-handed, and until I took her class, I always did this kind of stuff. She didn't think that made sense, and she gently taught me that. And she did numerous other things. Now you realize, of course, when you're a 6th grader, it never enters your mind to thank your teacher, nor for the next 10 years. Well, at some point, I realized all these things were remnants of those days with Mrs. Myers, and I started to try to find her. I called the University of Illinois, where I thought she'd gone to school, everything I could think of, but it absolutely failed. I couldn't find her. I was never going to be able to thank this person that really I had concluded by then was the reason for the project. When I really thought about it, I thought the reason for this project is I don't want to have any more Mrs. Myers situations. The Mrs. Myers regrets, I don't want that. The final letter, 365, I actually wrote to her. Mrs. Myers, Neal School, Urbana, Illinois. No return address, no way to identify it. Just a simple little note. I've been wanting to write this for a long time. I know it won't reach you, but you meant everything to me, something like that. And this is just to thank you and all the other teachers whose students just never occurred to them to thank you. And that's kind of, I know it sounds corny and silly, but it kind of got me off the hook in a way. I felt better having sent that. Well, what about the impact of this project? That was my last letter. Just tons of things that happened that were positive for me. And one example is a letter I got from a student about 5 years after my project. And she'd gone to New York to work. And she'd been a student of mine in one of my classes. And she'd also been in attendance at the baccalaureate program. The year that she graduated was the year I retired, and I was the baccalaureate speaker that year. So she had heard my baccalaureate talk. And her letter said something to the effect that her life had been this, that, and the other thing. And she recalled that baccalaureate talk, and it came to sort of her rescue in some circumstances she described. And she ended up by saying, "You changed my life." Now, if you've been a teacher, you know that the one thing that more than anything means something to you is to think that just maybe you had a positive effect on somebody somewhere. Well, that was it for me. And there were a lot of those kinds of things. I gave a lot of talks after that. The project was done that first year, and there was a couple of questions that always came up. One of them, particularly when I talked to a women's group, and the Red Hat Club was one that I talked to quite a bit. Somebody in kind of a crisp voice would say, "Well, did you ever thank your wife?" kind of with a tone in her voice like, "You're so busy thanking strangers, you probably ignored her." Well, that wasn't true at all. As a matter of fact, I did. I wrote her 2 thank you notes. They happened to both be on her birthday, and one was the penultimate note of the 364. So I felt okay about answering that question. The other question is a little tougher, maybe. Well, if it was such a great experience, have you been writing a letter a day for the last 20 years? No. It got to be a little bit of a burden in a way. Things come up, computers crash, blah, 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 blah. But I kept the spirit, and I still write thank you notes all the time. And I'm reminded of one of the real advantages of this project was that I was always, when I had to write a letter, I was always looking for the good in the world. I'm looking for an event that's positive. And I think that kind of an attitude is good for you. It just kind of uplifted my spirits and gave me more positive feelings. Were there any disappointments? Not really. A couple I'll mention quickly, but not really. One was the guy I'll refer to as the grammar guy. Sent him a effusive note and got back not a thank you for that, but rather a correction on a simple grammatical error. And I thought, that's an odd response. But I was used to it because I make grammatical errors all the time. The thing that struck with me, though, is that I worry that a lot of people don't write thank you notes because they're fearful that they won't be up to the challenge. Their writing won't be as good as the letter maybe they got, or they don't have nice stationery. And that just bothers me because the truth of the matter is that a thank you that's written on, grocery bag paper with a magic marker is good if it's deserved and it's real. Other disappointment, and people might object to these examples, that sometimes people, when they're at the height of their power and the height of their prominence, turn out to not be quite what they seem to be. And that's a little embarrassing when you go back and look at your letters and you realize that you've written Bill Cosby, who when I wrote him was just huge. And Joe Paterno, football coach at Penn State, just revered the time I wrote it, problems. And Rudy Giuliani, who at the time, and people may disagree with my assessment now, but at the time, he was Mr. Mayor for America. And today, I think not so much. The person to whom I give the greatest credit for resurfacing this project for me was a plain dealer columnist named Philip Morse. And oh, is he good. He wrote on tough subjects and he was just brilliant. Well, when I moved to Westlake, somehow he caught on to this project and we went to lunch and he wrote a column. And it was just absolutely brilliant. He summarized what I'm doing in ways I could never do myself. And he made me look like a hero. I mean, it was just remarkable how I looked. And it came out on a Sunday. And after that, I was just flooded with emails from strangers and friends and former students, just overwhelmed with positivity. And it peaked on the Wednesday following that Sunday. And that Wednesday was the exact 1-year anniversary of my wife's death. On a day that had potential for a lot of kind of gloom and, oh my goodness, I'm overwhelmed with happiness and positive thoughts. And I don't have enough wisdom to try to explain any of that kind of stuff. But it was just, to me, it was just like a miracle. When I look back on the project, I realize that the fundamental rule I've been trying to live by from that is to avoid Mrs. Meyer's regrets. I don't ever want to again be in a position where I realize that I have failed to thank someone or express my gratitude toward them again. That's a horrible, horrible feeling. I wrote 365 letters. Not all of them were to people. Some were to companies and institutions. I even wrote a letter to Canada. But of the 347 people that I wrote, 93 are no longer living. That's 93 people, if I hadn't done that project, would have never known how I felt about them. And I think that's just sad. And so when I end a talk on this subject, and I'll end it in the same way now, I say to the audience, as you leave, do me a favor. Think real hard about that one person in your life that you haven't thanked, that if you fail to thank, you'll regret forever. Just try to imagine who that might be. And do me a favor, write them a thank you note tonight. How do you end a thank you talk other than saying thank you so much for the people that are doing this video? Thank you for those who see it, who have stuck through it all the way through to the end. I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.